Welcome back. This is Daybreak, and thank you for staying with us. This is the State of the Nation. With me in studio this morning is Dr. Makali Mulu. He is the lawmaker representing Kitui Central constituency and a member of the Budget Committee of the National Assembly. Good morning, Dr.
Good morning.
Lovely having you here on the broadcast. Kevin Osido is the Executive Director of the County Governance Watch, with us also in studio this morning. Good morning, Kevin.
Good morning to
Lovely
you.
having you here on the broadcast. And we had invited Senator Richard Onyonka, and he confirmed his presence here on the show. We nonetheless proceed in the meantime. Let's begin with a look at the front pages of the publications, gentlemen, and beginning with the both dailies have similar different wording. The same person who is the subject, the American ambassador who is outgoing, Meg Whitman, and the Daily Nation says the Silicon Valley billionaire Meg Whitman yesterday announced her resignation as America's ambassador to Kenya, ending her 2-year stint in the country in a tenure during which she pleased and annoyed in equal measure. Her critics accuse her of causing uproar to Kenya Kwanza administration and have welcomed the move, as well as that of Donald Trump, who will be back at the White House on January the 20th. Shockwave of Trump's re-election hits home, says the Standard. The aftershocks of Donald Trump's re-election as America's 47th president hit the Kenyan shores after Whitman resigned as Washington's ambassador. The envoy Trump's re-election as America's 47th president hit the Kenyan shores after Whitman resigned as Washington's ambassador. The envoy, who described her mission as honor and privilege, was facing growing criticism of her support for President Ruto at a time of mounting public unease over governance. Coming to you first, what do you draw, Dr. Makali Mulu, of Meg Whitman's 2-year tenure as Washington's envoy to Kenya?
Basically, I think what Kenyans, and this has been said by Kenyans out there, Ayub, and thank you for hosting us. You know, for the last 2 years, Kenyans have been very keen watching what is happening in their country. And this was as a follow-up to the promises which were made to them by Kenya Kwanza government when they came to power. And one of the things which has been happening over time is the American ambassador in this country has always been like the other arm of government which watches what the government is doing from the side of our development partners. Actually, mostly, you find that the ambassadors who have been representing America have always been like the external voice, leading the external voice from all the embassies in terms of how governance is happening in this country. And what Kenyans have been saying, and I think it's the truth, is that for the first time, the ambassador for the last 2 years seems to have not been really pushing the government to do things right from a governance perspective. And this is informed by things like the abductions we have seen. It's been kind of confirmed by things like the killings which have happened, the human rights abuses which have happened, and nobody seems to be telling the government, you're on the wrong track. Unfortunately for her, those who had come before her have been very hard positions, having very hard positions on those issues. So it's like she has gone to bed with the government. And that's why you see, people have been saying, so long as she remains here, then we are likely to see these bad things happening to Kenyans. And I think that's where the push was coming from. There was a lot of public pressure. And you remember it started almost like, actually even early in the year, that this ambassador seems to be watching as bad things are being done to Kenyans, while the expectation was that she should have been in the forefront, saying this should not be happening. Even if she's not listened to, people would have imagined that she should have been the voice saying this is right, this is wrong. And I think that's where she got it wrong. And that's why you see, we're happy that she even resigned before Trump took over the office.
Yeah, so basically, according to you, she was not Smith Hempston, who in time of a critical juncture for Kenya pushed the government on critical issues that you have mentioned. But she will argue, or her supporters would say otherwise, that she has been an ambassador for the country in marketing it, having a business background.
Yeah, no wonder she's a billionaire. But you know what Kenyans expect mostly is, I think human rights issues have been very important for any ambassador who comes from America, and that's why she may have done well in terms of promoting trade issues and all that. But you know, the question is that what Kenyans expect? Are we expect to see more trade between Kenya and America, or are Kenyans looking forward to an ambassador who pushes very hard for issues of governance? Because actually the issue here is governance, not more of trade. Because Kenya, I think it doesn't even do much trade with America. If you look at the analysis, we do much trade with our neighbors, Uganda, Tanzania, than America.
America is also a big trading partner.
It is, but I'm telling you, if you analyze the figures, we are doing better with our local neighbors than America in terms of trade.
Yeah. Kevin has more or less had leaning towards commercial diplomacy than the issues that Dr. Makali Mula and many Kenyans have pointed out been the soft underbelly for Ambassador Meg Whitman.
Thank you so much, Ayub. And indeed, that is quite a very hard stance for, especially if you look at the expectations of the Friends of Kenya and bilateral relationships that are supposed to be built, and particularly given the prevailing contexts. And the context of countries really inform how the foundations of these bilateral engagements are supposed to be done. And taking note of the timing at which Ambassador Meg Whitman arrived into the country, it was barely a few weeks, if not days, to the August 2022 general elections. And so would have expected that a proper brief would have been done, and that the ambassador's interest, and also bordering on the appointive authorities' notes to the incoming ambassador that is now outgoing because she's resigned, should have really informed how the engagements are supposed to be done. And we did not see as Kenyans really a proper balance in terms of what the expectations of the government of the day were, and indeed even the citizens. And as Dr. says, most Kenyans therefore would imagine that the ambassador is supposed to be very outspoken around issues that are inflicting a majority of Kenyans and conflicting with the priorities of the government of the day. But that having been said, we also must not forget that the United States of America has really invested heavily in this country despite these challenges. And if you look at her background, as you rightfully said, a Silicon Valley billionaire, and some of the expectations of Kenya Kwanza government, for example, what we call the KIPES, the County Aggregation Industrial Parks, where we had expected that in about at least half of the 47 counties would now be having similar like Silicon Valleys in the countries. And so if you look at the manifesto of President William Ruto, and his engagements with some of these ambassadors, and particularly Ambassador Meg Whitman, the expectation would have been, yes, that you balance the interests of the government of the day, but also look at the prevailing context. And so these are contexts where human rights violations were really at the apex. We had issues with the serious governance issues around devolution, where the American government has also heavily invested. Concerns around peace and security in greater parts of Kenya, where again the American government has heavily invested. And so Kenyans were at pains to be able to pick some of these low-lying fruits and credit them to the United States. And that is particularly given the demeanor and the attitude of the leadership of the embassy, particularly within Nairobi. But having been said, is also not to forget about the heavy investments in electoral reforms, despite heavy sentiments from Madam Ambassador as well around the elections in 2022. I know that the American government really invested pre-electoral process during the elections itself. And even now, as we head towards the 2027 general elections, there is heavy investment in terms of building our electoral reforms processes and all that. But then the most important thing is how to exercise that balance, that there's a government of the day, a local government that has these strong bilateral interests, and you also have the people who are supposed to also hold the government accountable, and then largely how these bilateral partnerships build onto balancing these different options.
And Dr. Makali, did the failure to hold the government to account in this case in calling out when the administration meanders away from governance issues, as Kevin had mentioned, and the silence from the American ambassador, perhaps a dark spot in her career as a representative of the American people to Kenya?
Obvious, it is going to be, and more so as a representative in Kenya. Because, you know, in the past we have had a number of ambassadors. And as I said earlier, and looking at what my colleague is saying, in the past, we've seen American ambassadors in this country come out strongly in case the government is not doing the right thing. And they have been the voice out there saying, we are not going to entertain this. And at times, you have even suffered some consequences where they say, we will not be able to support this project because you are not doing this, and put demands. We've not seen any demands being put forward by this ambassador. She might have done well in other areas if she has been ambassador in other areas. But for this particular one in Kenya, I think if we were to rate them, she'll be ranking very low. If we were to rate the other ambassadors who have been in the past.
Yeah.
And as you're saying, you know, when you get to a brief to a country, I'm sure she must have been given a brief that even though trade is important, but for America in Kenya, and the expectations of the public was that we would see more of governance issues being championed than trade issues. We know America has a serious military bases in this country, which we appreciate. But matters trade, even though they are important, Kenyans look forward and look up to America matters governance. Mm-hmm. And that's the only thing Kenyans say. They see America as that power that can push the government beyond where Kenyans can push it into matters governance. So when you fail that test, obviously then Kenyans will to some extent evaluate you harshly.
And then what happens? Because this is the point. The American ambassador, for example, whoever he or she may be, does not bear the power to, in the end, hold the governments to account. I mean, there can be no substantive output of what he or she may say. But then what happens to our institutions? For example, you are a member of parliament. You sit at the house that represents the people. You have the power to even impeach a sitting president. Yeah. Do we need to count on a foreign ambassador to get our governance issues correct, yet we have institutions and leaders who have the mandate from the people? And what does this say in a globalized political setup where even when you look at the campaigns which just ended in the US, because of security threats and political violence, some of the leadership, including Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, had to address audiences and the people from enforced and bulletproof glasses to the extent of violence. It doesn't take our ambassador in Washington to lecture them about accountability and how they need to correct their political systems and governance. But why do you count on the foreign ambassadors to get our governance issues right? You are a member of parliament.
It's actually not counting on them to get the thing right. It is counting them to hear their voice. Kenyans do not expect them to change the government because we are the people who put the government in power.
But their voice is inconsequential.
But we are saying, you know, we are used to a situation where we hear their voice and they come out strongly. This time, there's been a very minimal voice in terms of things which, for example, the abductions, the killings, you know. I think it's only about 2 days when they started to come out. I remember there was a statement there about 2 years.
Which is a joint from the embassies.
So you see, so that's what we are saying. They might not do much, but we are used to a situation where when issues of human rights abuses, when issues of abductions like what we have seen, when issues of extrajudicial killings happen, you hear the voice is heard. This time it has been very silent. We will sort out our matters, but that voice has always been important in enforcing and reinforcing the process.
But Honorable Makali, I'm talking about the outcome because it's as important as the consequence.
Yes.
I mean, their voices are inconsequential. If we talk about extrajudicial killings, we set up the Independent Policing and Oversight Authority, IPOA, which investigates, and these cases are taken before the courts of law, and if found guilty, then those involved are sentenced by the courts of law, depending on the threshold of evidence. There's Parliament where you sit, which even recently we clocked a historic high. We impeached a sitting deputy president, and you are a member of parliament.
Yes.
I mean, why then focus on the voices of foreign envoys when we have put in place institutions with capacities that can correct and remedy our governance issues?
If the institutions were working as expected, you would not imagine of that external voice. But over time, and you live in this country, you know, some of these institutions are not working as expected. They are performing below expectations. And what we are saying is basically is that, you know, America is normally seen as a big brother by most of the countries. And the thing is, when the big brother complains, you may not be able to punish, but they send a bit of, you know, a bit of fear that if I don't do as the big brother wishes, then there could be some consequences. And actually what makes countries either improve or things better is the expected consequences. That if I don't do this, what will happen? And I think in the past we have seen countries which have been remotely controlled by the big brother to an extent that they do things right. You know the good thing, the issues of diplomacy, as he was saying, there's what we call soft diplomacy, and there could be hard diplomacy. And I think what we are saying is we've seen more, at times there could be need to apply some hard diplomacy, where you say, if you don't do 1, 2, 3, you are going to suffer these consequences. And I think that's a gap which has been missing. And that is what Kenyans have been expecting. For example, you saw the Inspector General of Police the other day, when he met one of the departmental committees, come out clear and said, gave figures, statistics relating to how many Kenyans have disappeared in such a state. What would you expect? So this is, I think Kenyans are saying, we wish these guys, even if they don't do anything, we wish they could be, this could be the daily, you know, discourse, that where are these Kenyans? We get both internal pressure and external pressure. By combining the two, we are likely to get some results.
Yeah, and Kenyans have given them a constitution which has immense powers granted to institutions, and that was the expectation, to have a better governance, which is working.
I just wanted to make an addition to that, Ayub, that we also should not lift our eyes off those institutions. And this over-concentration at looking at the U.S. ambassador as the only unit of the American interests in Kenya. Of course, that is the political face. Ambassador Meg Whitman has been the diplomatic face, especially from the U.S., but we also must remember that the embassy works in a totality of units. In fact, they have as many departments as you can be able to imagine, from humanitarian assistance to disaster and emergencies to governance, peace, democracy, and law and order. And I have to declare interest because the organization I serve with benefits partly from American funding, especially from our devolution programs and elections. And so we know that there is heavy investment in making Kenya better beyond the face of the ambassador, and that the officials at the embassy invest in building capacity of institutions and even of individuals, like some of the demands and accountability measures that we saw in this country, especially from citizens raising their voices. Some of those must be credited to some of these development partners. And in terms of our institutions, even the push to have agencies like IPOA, and I am aware about Police Reforms Working Group that has been doing a lot of work to be able to ensure that there is capacity and that there is accountability for some of these institutions. The capacity building and technical support largely comes from some of these bilateral partners, and the American embassy in Kenya really through USAID and others really have done immense investment in terms of trying to deal with some of these issues. They might not come out very strongly to be said that, yes, we are training these people to be able to do this, but as partners and interested parties in this process, we see, and that sometimes beyond the statements and the sentiments by the political faces, being the ambassadors and high commissioners, and in this case now the U.S. ambassador, at the back of the curtains, what Kenyans call Nyuma tent, there is a lot of work that is going on to try and build institutions, to try and even engage with Bunge, because we have been invited to some of these joint forums where we have members of parliament, even county assemblies, and indeed aiming to have very strong institutions that can also be able to hold governments accountable. But then, of course, in this case of Ambassador Meg Whitman, I think the challenge is in this overbearing, to be seen to be too supportive of the government in place, which in many aspects did not respond to a number of calls by Kenyans. And so we cannot say that this is really the embassy, but largely the political face, and probably trying to exercise her mandate and authority given certain interests that the American government has with Kenya. And we have seen those interests. Remember, for almost 8 or so years, we saw President William Ruto going to the US to really, and this was a state function that brought in lots of goodies that we had hoped that Kenyans from across, the country would benefit from. And so communicating some of these interests to Kenyans so that they are able to balance between the heavy dealings, what Mheshimiwa is calling the hard diplomatic approaches, and the softer issues, which therefore responds to the immediate needs of Kenyans. I think that was a little bit of a failure, but then the expectation that we must see the voices of our bigger brothers, especially on accountability, because the United States of America still stands stronger, even in terms of issues of democracy. Of course, there have been lots of challenges, and you've raised them, especially when their campaigns have to be done in very properly sealed quarters. But I think we still have lessons to learn, and our bigger brothers also must admit that they also have certain lessons to learn from Africa, and particularly from Kenya.
Yes, and to just get it right, the state visit happened for the first time in 16 years. The last one was in 2008, before President William Ruto became the first African head of state to be accorded a state visit to the US, which happened in May this year. And Kevin, does that then mean issues of health, security, and institutional building is overshadowed by the political face, and the failure by the ambassador to come out and condemn these killings, the abductions, the extrajudicial killings, blamed on state authorities, and the frustrations that institutions like IPOA, which you had mentioned, had faced from the security agencies, saying that the National Police Service was not cooperating in the process of investigating officials who are reportedly or allegedly involved.
And the answer to that is right, which is an affirmative yes, that we have not seen very deliberate communications going out to be able to cement the expectations of Kenyans against the prevailing environment, which really has not safeguarded some of the interests that the United States of America has with Kenya. For instance, human rights. Would have expected that, yes, I know, because we saw them issue joint statements. But we had expected that even from the American government itself, through the representative, that some of the democratic values and good governance indices like, democracy, accountability, public participation, and human rights needed to have been given a much more stronger hand, even in terms of exercising service delivery on issues like health, where, again, our bilateral friends really do a lot of work with both the national government. Of course, health is devolved, but largely with the county governments through their health grants and others. But then there's this overshadowing of some of the lack of balancing between the interests of the government of the day and the interests of the citizens, and largely, the problem of communication, which then really would inform how the incoming or the next ambassador, the US ambassador to Kenya, would then want to communicate both with the government, because there is government communication, and even with the citizens. Remember, Ambassador Meg Whitman has been out in the counties, She's been to Homa Bay, I think, much more times than any other American ambassador. She was in Kisumu the other day, and in Vihiga, and I think in Kakamega, if I'm not wrong, and many other places. And just recently we saw her at the inaugural party of the deputy president. And you see, those are signs of somebody who really wants to engage, but probably that the environment is also quite intense and condensed to be able to allow for strong bilateral engagements.
All right. As she leaves Nairobi back to California, we have also witnessed hardliners who have been appointed to critical dockets by Donald Trump as the transition kickstarts. Yesterday, he met Joe Biden at the White House, and she mentioned the choice made by the American people, wishing the new administration a success. And this, largely according to commentators, are hardliners who are picked by Donald Trump, since they conform to his Trumpian politics, which is one of isolation and protectionism orbiting around him, including his picks for foreign secretary and defense, and also the first chief of staff woman at the White House, Susie, who appears to be, according to many liberals, the only voice of reason in the House, who may cancel Donald Trump month if he meanders away from the real issues. When we get back from the break, Dr. Makali Mulu, you are a member of the mediation team and a budget committee of the National Assembly. We'll be talking about the standoff between members of the mediation committee and what this then means for the county governments, and Kevin as well as your account here on the broadcast, and talk more about the already cash crunch situation across the counties, which the Council of Governors says is unsustainable given the money that had delayed coming from the Exchequer. All that after the break here on the broadcast. Stay tuned.